seriously and quickly began searching for the missing student. The first thing was questioning Violet, who last saw Salma. She confirmed that she took her friend to meet her ex-fiancé, and they said goodbye in the parking lot. A couple of hours later, Salma Montes' phone was turned off and unavailable. Kevin, who was visited by the police in the morning, said he saw his ex-fiancée in the parking lot. They talked for a while and went their separate ways. It was obvious that the guy was not telling us something, but he had nothing to show for it. Less than 24 hours had passed since Salma's disappearance, and there was still hope that she would soon turn up alive and unharmed. And there were no good reasons for detentions, searches, and interrogations, so the investigators limited themselves to talking outside the station and collecting testimony. Salma's friends, fellow students, and relatives took an active part in the search for her. They pasted flyers with her photos around the city, created posts on social networks through which they asked to share any relevant information about Salma's whereabouts. The missing person was described as a petite, skinny brunette with light skin and brown eyes. Among the special features mentioned were her tattoos: 3 hearts on her stomach, musical notes on her right arm, as well as a small scar above her eyebrow. She was carrying a cloth backpack with textbooks, books, notes, and a student ID card, which she always carried with her. A grisly find on the banks of the canal. On June 7, 2019, a badly disfigured and decomposed human body was found on the bank of a canal miles away from the interstate highway. The appearance of which was literally shocking. The hands were missing, the skin had been stripped off in places, the hair had been burned off, and the face had been mutilated beyond recognition. In addition, all teeth had been removed, and no personal belongings or clothing could be found. According to preliminary reports, the cause of death was a deep wound in the neck inflicted by the precise blow of a sharp knife. As a result of this action, the carotid artery was damaged, and the girl literally bled to death in a couple of minutes, and all other injuries were inflicted posthumously. Obviously, the perpetrator did everything possible to make the body unrecognizable, either by fingerprints, dental records, or any special features or external data. Experts only agreed that it was a young girl, aged 20-25 years old, and it was immediately suggested that the body belongs to Salma Montes, who disappeared a week ago and whose story was actively replicated in the press. The mother and sister of the girl were invited to the identification, but they could not recognize their relative in the disfigured corpse. The women simply refused to believe that someone could have treated the kind-hearted and sympathetic Salma so cruelly. In order to unambiguously identify the identity of the victim, required an expensive DNA examination. However, the Montes family had no money for such research, so the test was conducted by a state laboratory whose equipment left much to be desired, and the probability of error or inaccuracy was quite high. Unfortunately, the results of the examination confirmed that the mutilated body found did indeed belong to the missing student. However, the grief-stricken relatives of the girl still refused to believe it and announced on social networks to raise funds for a second examination in a private laboratory with more accurate and modern equipment. Hundreds of concerned people responded to their request, and the necessary amount of money was collected quickly enough. But alas, the retest only confirmed the results of the previous one. It was Salma. The only suspect, relatives, and close friends of the deceased in one voice claimed that she had no enemies or ill-wishers. But at the same time, almost all mentioned her troubled relationship with Kevin Pilaster, with whom she broke off her engagement about a month before her disappearance. Salma's mother and sister claimed that her ex-fiancé abused and beat her, which is why she decided to break up with him. It would seem that this guy should have been the main, if not the only suspect from the beginning. But until the body was identified, he remained at large, and his house, car, and personal belongings were not searched, which gave him a great opportunity to get rid of the evidence. Only 2 weeks after Salma's disappearance and a week after the discovery of her body, Kevin was taken into custody on charges of kidnapping and brutalizing his former fiancée. The young man himself categorically denied his guilt, although he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. However, his testimony has largely changed. The new version found evidence. In the opinion of forensic experts, an experienced butcher or surgeon worked on the body of the girl. The hands were separated from the body with precise cuts on the joints, which spoke of a good knowledge of anatomy. The skin was also expertly and skillfully removed. As it turned out, the perpetrator removed it in places where there were tattoos, as well as noticeable birthmarks, in order to eliminate the possibility of identifying the body by them. Since Kevin had worked as a butcher in the past and had extensive experience in cutting carcasses, the prosecution tried to cling to this thread. But the defendant's lawyers insisted that it was a mere coincidence, and this circumstance could not be used in court as evidence of their client's involvement in the case. According to the new version told by Pilaster after his arrest, that evening they actually met with his ex-fiancée in a parking lot near his work. They were just talking when suddenly another guy approached them, who according to Kevin was Salma's new boyfriend. Allegedly, this guy was jealous of the girl's former fiancée and punched her in the face with a swing. But the defendant stood up for Salma. He told her to take shelter in his van, and he himself decided to deal with the offender in a manly manner. However, the fight had barely started when Salma jumped out of the van and begged Kevin not to hurt her boyfriend. After that, Salma and the stranger left, and Pilaster went home. The defendant's parents and grandmother, who were called as witnesses, claimed that he returned home at midnight, changed his clothes, and went out with his new girlfriend named Kinsella. Soon, the girl herself showed up at the station to confirm Kevin's alibi, saying that on that fateful night, he was with her and could not have committed the crime, and then cover his tracks. The van in which the suspect was traveling was seized, and inside the vehicle was found washed-up traces of blood belonging to the deceased. In response, the young man claimed that Salma had gotten a nosebleed after a jealous boyfriend punched her, and she probably left a trail when she hid in the van while the men worked things out. However, according to Salma's family and friends, no new boyfriend has appeared for her since her breakup with her fiancé. She was completely absorbed in her studies, wrote a diploma, and prepared for his defense. By the way, to find this mysterious boyfriend, which Kevin could not even thickly describe and failed, most likely because he made him up, despite the new details in Consuela, who came out of. Nowhere to confirm the alibi of the accused, the whole story looked very strange and unreliable. Nevertheless, the court found that the evidence presented by the prosecution was insufficient to convict. Pilaster was acquitted and released from the courtroom in August 2019. Escape from the city. Almost immediately after his release, the young man hurriedly left his hometown and for about 6 months did not give any news of himself at all. This caused a storm of indignation among the relatives of the murdered girl because the case was not closed, the investigation continued, and the only suspect was simply released like this. In fact, letting him escape as this unprecedentedly brutal case became publicized and its details were covered in the press. For about 2 months, many residents of the city decided to express their support for the Montes family. People gathered at spontaneous rallies, demanding to find Kevin and to reopen the case against him because he was clearly not telling something, and the story he told was not believable. Salma's family and the activists who helped them succeeded in getting the investigation reopened, and a second search of the suspect's home revealed a hidden cache in the wall containing Kevin's bloody clothes and a large kitchen knife, which he had probably used to kill and then partially cut up his victim. Most likely, he had not had time or was afraid to dispose of this evidence, believing that no one would find it in the stash. At almost the same time, Pilaster, apparently following the advice of his lawyers, decided to make himself known and go on the attack. He didn't just make himself known, he filed a lawsuit against the Montes family, accusing them of slander, organizing his harassment, and tampering with evidence. The man said he was forced to leave town because he feared for his life because of the harassment organized by Salma's mother and sister. In his opinion, the women had turned the entire town against him, and he was simply afraid of being lynched. As evidence, Kevin provided a mass of anonymous threatening messages that he received on a daily basis, all because his personal information, including his phone number and email address, was published on the internet, as he assumed it was done by relatives of his ex-fiancée. He also claimed that he was being guarded under the house by unknown people who threatened to do away with him and his family. Following the gruesome discovery at the Pilser home, Kevin has once again become the prime suspect in the murder case and has once again been taken into custody. At the same time, the man and his lawyers insisted that the evidence was planted on him and also accused the Attorney General of collusion with the Montes family and the deliberate concealment of part of the CCTV footage, which allegedly could prove the innocence of the defendant and confirm his alibi. However, no such recordings were found because they simply did not exist. A new investigation and a protracted trial before Kevin could be taken back into custody, it was necessary to overturn his previous acquittal. This process was somewhat protracted because the judge did not want to admit his mistake and insisted that his decision was correct and only right. However, after several sessions, the verdict was overturned, after which a new case was started, taking into account the discovered evidence. In this regard, Kevin's parents and grandmother decided to organize a real press conference during which, answering questions from journalists, called their family members victims of the machinations of Salma's mother and sister. According to them, these women from the beginning were against the relationship between Kevin and Salma, while the Pilsers loved Salma with all their hearts and already considered her a member of their family. They also claimed that they were literally crushed by the news of the death of the failed daughter-in-law, and soon they were in for another shock when their son was accused of Salma's murder. The suspect himself, in the interrogation, did not hide the fact that they had a difficult relationship with the former lover, and even confirmed that at times he raised his hand on her. He justified his actions by the fact that Salma allegedly cheated, and he had the right to punish her. He also did not hide that he was annoyed when Salma broke off the engagement, which she, in his opinion, had no right to do because it offended him as a man. A new trial did not begin until June 2020. This time, Kevin was charged with kidnapping and aggravated brutal murder motivated by gender-based hate. In fact, he himself led the investigation to this conclusion, constantly repeating, "A woman had no right to act and speak like that." The collected evidence, including the bloody clothes and the knife, which was recognized as the murder weapon, as well as the testimony of witnesses, was enough to convict. And the story previously told by Kevin about Salma's new boyfriend, who, in his opinion, was the real culprit, simply fell apart because there was no other guy in the parking lot or in the life of Salma. However, the prosecution requested time to complete the investigation, and the court agreed to grant the request. In this regard, it was decided to send the defendant for 6 months of pre-trial detention in a maximum security prison. But due to the coronavirus pandemic that swept the world, the investigation was delayed and court hearings were repeatedly postponed. So Kevin's 6-month pre-trial detention dragged on for almost 2 years. A fair sentence. It wasn't until May 2023, on the eve of the 4th anniversary of the crime, that a new hearing was held, at which the prosecution presented all the evidence it had managed to uncover in the meantime. In court, several witnesses testified to the fact that Pilser abused his fiancée, beat her, and sought to control her every move, depriving her of any freedom. He treated her like a thing that belonged only to him and did not accept the fact that she chose to leave him. On August 16, 2023, Kevin was found guilty of aggravated murder, as well as cruelty to the body. As for the kidnapping, this point of the charge, according to the judge, was not proven because Salma herself came to meet with her ex-fiancé and herself could get into his car. Nevertheless, the evidence presented in the courtroom was enough to send a young man to prison for life. More precisely, he was sentenced to 70 years in prison. But if we take into account that at that time the defendant was 32 years old, it is fair to say that such a sentence became for him a life sentence. In addition, Kevin was required to pay the Montes family about $45,000 as moral compensation. Salma's mother and sister later stated that they were quite satisfied with the verdict, although Pilaster never admitted his guilt, did not repent, and did not explain the motives for his terrible and inhumane act. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click the bell. There are many shocking stories ahead.